Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you all hear me okay? Fantastic. My name is Juan Perez. I'm an education reporter with Politico, and it's my privilege to moderate today's panel on innovating the road beyond K through 12 education. I'm thrilled to introduce today's distinguished panel, starting with Representative Glenn Grothman of Wisconsin, Representative Victoria Spartz of Indiana, and of course, Jesse O'Connell, the Strategy Director for Federal Policy at the Indianapolis-based Lumina Foundation. Thank you all for joining us today. We have a lot to cover, so we're going to jump right into it. Folks, Congress has invested an unprecedented amount of money into education, billions and billions of dollars to combat unprecedented circumstances. But there's a problem. College enrollment plummeted by close to 4% overall this spring, according to the National Student Clearinghouse Center. Community colleges suffered a notable blow. So I want to open it up with a question for all of you here. How do we recover? How do we encourage post-secondary institutions to modernize and meet the needs of today's students? Representative Spartz, let's start with you.
Well, I think if we want to modernize, we have to eliminate perverse incentives in education. Every system is driven by incentives. So I'll give you a small example. I was an adjunct faculty at the Kelley School of Business in Indianapolis. So how do I get evaluated as a professor or a faculty? By students. How can I have a good evaluation by students? Well, you probably can guess, by having good grades, right? So generally, this is how the process is. And then how the colleges are held accountable, okay, by graduation, requirements, right? How many, people graduated? How can you graduate? Bell curve, inflate, give a lot of worthless diplomas. There is no skin in the game and accountability for the colleges to provide quality education. And there is no accountability for a lot of programs. Do I really have some good employment after that? What about that? We have enormous perverse incentives. I can tell you how much it's going to cost the college, and government is guaranteed. So, okay, of course, where is incentive for them to modernize an incentive and provide quality education? It doesn't exist. And until we change that, and until all of these programs have skin in the game, it's not going to change.
Representative Grothman.
Well, right. I think we have to do a better job of educating young people as to where they're going to be after graduating from college. Again and again, you run into people with degrees that do not have a great deal of value, 50, 60 grand in debt. I ran into a guy the other day in retail, told me he was making like 40 grand a year, good, smart guy, 32 years old, living with his parents because he got a degree from a high status liberal arts college, but he was taken advantage of. So we've got to educate people right away where the money is and get rid of this, quite frankly, snobbery, something that's related to a college degree, because a lot of the well-paying jobs that we need in our society do not require a college degree. And, if you're one of those guys who deals with the telephone poles in the middle of the night, you can make six figures. You can be making six figures when you're 21-year-olds without debt. But how many people think of that? So the good jobs are out there, but we have to educate the young people not to be ripped off by an institution in which you get a degree that leads to nothing.
I want to talk more about cost and access in a bit, but first, Mr. O'Connell, your response?
Juan, I think these points about how are we assuring quality in the system, what does overall affordability look like? Like, these are really big concerns that families across the country are thinking about and talking about. But for me, I think we have to start with this understanding of what environment are we making policy in, right? So 37% of today's students are older than 25. About half of students are working part-time, right? Nearly 80% of students aren't residential students, right? So what is the actual makeup of who we're talking about and who we're making policy for? And when we start from that, I think we can begin to understand a little bit about why we've seen some of these enrollment challenges over the past year, right? People were concerned about their health and safety. And when people are home, we're right now we're in the middle of a huge infrastructure conversation here in DC. What does broadband access look like, right? Like, how are these students able to enroll online and continue to participate in their programs when campuses were in some cases closed? So, I think it was encouraging to see kind of 3 successive rounds of these rescue investments in our higher education system, starting with the CARES Act through the appropriations at the end of last year and then into the American Rescue Plan, because I think it was a recognition that we did need to support these places. And a great deal of that money was passed through to students to support the needs that they had outside the classroom, right? It went beyond tuition. It was addressing their housing needs needs and their food needs and their transportation concerns. So I think taking that footing into this next conversation, sort of what are we going to do? We've really learned some important things over the past year.
And it's important to talk about spending here, but I want to hear your perspective from the two of you as to really how you feel about the possibility of even more money coming into the system through the education department budget and other initiatives such as infrastructure. Too much? Not enough?
Well, I mean, I've tried to figure out how we're going to be paying for all of that. I'm a CPA, I'm an accounting usually, there are debits and credits equal. I don't think in the federal government it works, even last year we spent 6 trillion, we collected 3. So it's definitely roughly pretty half of what we're spending. This year is going to be even worse. And enormous amount of debt was added just, this year to our debt. So a huge percentage in how much money we're printing, which create really a lot of inflationary trends. And as you know, inflation is a form of regressive taxation. It's going to hurt the people with the low income the most. So I think it's a big challenge. And education, our system doesn't lack money, educational system. We have enormous amount of inefficiency in the education system, enormous amount of spending, enormous amount of government control, and perverse incentive, as I said earlier. And until we start thinking differently, what is K-12 should deliver? Our now post-secondary education is remediating failed K-12 education. In the state of Indiana, we just released, and we're one of the better ones, released some learn testing. It's only 28% of children, and it's slightly lower, but it wasn't much, lower before the pandemic, can do basic mathematics and English. 28%. What are we talking about? Everything else. So now we're remediating. Colleges become a remediation of failed K-12 system. And we have to have a serious discussion because this is the future of our country and these children. Education is an ultimate equalizer. If we don't provide these fundamental and foundational skills, we're in trouble.
Congressman Grotham, did you want to respond?
Well, I disagree with the idea again that we need more money. It's what we're doing with the money. I think there is going to be a demographic dip in the number of people in college, but there were probably too many people in college in the first place anyway. Like I said, we need more people in what in Wisconsin we call the technical schools. I think other people would call community colleges. If you talk to the trade schools, the technical schools, again and again, you find people who got a 4-year degree farfled around in life for 5 or 6 years. And then you get the older people going back to school, getting a degree at 31 or 32 or a credential at 31 or 32 that they should have got when they were 21 or 22. And if we do that, we won't have to put any more money in the system.
So, I think I don't share the congressman's perspective on the need for more credentials. I think research has consistently shown that by the end of the decade, 2/3 of jobs in the economy are going to need a credential after high school. But where I do share your perspective is what we mean by the word college, right? Like, I think we have done a very bad job over time, sort of letting that word mean a very specific thing, which is a 4-year residential experience. And I absolutely agree with you that, that's not what we need to be emphasizing, because there are a variety of pathways that we know lead to a good job, good opportunity. And sort of making sure that we're investing across that spectrum. Your question was about overall funding. And I think there's an important question about what is the right level, but also where is that money going? There's a $78 billion investment gap in our community colleges relative to our 4-year schools. Yet we know that half of all students in our system are attending community colleges. So I think there's a really important question about where's the money going? What type of institutions are they supporting? And then how are we ensuring that that investment looks even across all 50 states? Because we know there's differences there as well.
Let's talk a little bit more about that investment. I think many of us share concerns about the pandemic's effect on underserved students and people who were already amongst those left out of higher education before the pandemic. Now, this is arguably a pressing workforce issue for students in urban, suburban, rural communities, especially in America's heartland, right? Now, the president and Democratic lawmakers are advancing a proposal to boost the maximum Pell Grant award by $400, bringing it to just shy of $6,900. Is that enough?
So, it's a really complicated question to say what is enough, right? I think what we know is that the Pell Grant used to cover 80% of the cost of the college back in the 1970s. These days, it covers about a third, right? So we know that the purchasing power of Pell has been dramatically eroded. The proposal we're seeing now, it's adding about $1,800 to the maximum award. There's $1,400 in I think, the American Families Plan, and then $400 through the budget request. Yeah. So, Pell is crucial because of its portability, because of the fact that, yes, it pays for your tuition, tuition, but then remaining amounts can go to you to cover those costs that go beyond tuition. So I do think I am less concerned over like what is exactly the right amount, so much as like, is it getting students what they need to be supported at the places that they're attending?
Ms. Sparks.
Since you're talking economic theory investments, I would like to see how we measure our return on investment. So no one is against, investing in human capital, and it's going to become more and more important because, they say what, on average, you will have now 26 different jobs in your lifespan, and you have to really learn new skills, and you have this ability to do this lifelong learning, and sometimes, to tell you the truth, when I needed to learn how to drive combine, I didn't go to technical school. I spent a day with my husband, and I was great at that, okay? So there is a lot I have 2 master's degree, but I learned way more when I actually went and got a job and got trained. And I caught myself. What I teach at college is very different, that I'm teaching, I was a national trainer at Big 4 public accounting firms. What I teach actually graduates of the same colleges. So I think the ability to learn, and they have a fundamental skills to learn and be ready for lifelong learning, that has to come from educational system, and we have a big lag on that. And I can see that by teaching for over a decade and at different levels. And I think that's a discussion we have to have, because we do need to invest in human capital, and we have to do a much better job.
I think one problem with the Pell Grants that I have is that they kind of discriminate against certain type of people. And if you are married, if you have an income, you don't get the Pell. And I get complaints from parents who feel, from mothers in particular, me and my husband both work, my child's bringing up the debt. I have a sister or whatever who's got a child and she's not working, and her child gets free college and I don't. I realize the Pell doesn't pay for all the college, but right now Pell is one of those programs that, it penalizes you from getting for being married. It penalizes you or your kids if you're working. And that's something I wish we would look at.
I appreciate your perspective on the number of people who may be pursuing higher education right now. At the same time, though, it's clear that the pandemic has exacerbated some troubling trends when it comes to, say, students of color or low-income students who are simply filling out applications for federal aid. The question is this: as we emerge from the pandemic, what can we do to re-engage high school students to think about post-secondary education or career pathways? I'd start with you, Representative Grothman, please.
Well, I don't know that you have to help them re-engage. I mean, what are you going to do? You're 18 years old. Either you're going to get a job or you're going to be beginning to plan for your future. Like I said, I think beginning in high school, and I think right now the guidance counselors of this country have by and large done a horrible job, but you have to have people begin to think about what career they want and what's the easiest way to get there. And I don't think we're doing that today. We have too many people bringing up the debt. I would like to, at least, I've got a bill out there that allows universities who care about their students to restrict the amount of loans that they can get, which would be a good thing right off the top, rather than, and there's another university I talked to, they almost encourage their kids to get a lot of loans because they think it's a selling point to come here. Look at all the toys you can afford, which I thought was embarrassing, but that's what they do. But I don't think you have to force people to be engaged about their future. You got fundamental problems in the parenting. If you're in that position, my answers are the same answers I had before. You have to educate kids to have a plan so you don't wind up 23 years old and a lot of debt.
I think we need to have a better integration of secondary and post-secondary education. And I think it's a very serious conversation we need to have. And a lot of, I say, if, I obviously, you can tell by my Yankee accent, I didn't grow up in Indiana. Even in Tennessee, they call me Yankee, so I like it. But I grew up, it was Ukraine, but it was Soviet Union at that time. So I was able in 15 years to get master's degree. And a lot of skills that I obtained got ready for me to go for master's degree here right away. And, in English was not my first language. So I think we can do much better job integrating our secondary, post-secondary schools and actually have more better measurement of outcomes and skills that you need to obtain through the time you're ready going through your high school. I think we actually underestimate how much these kids can learn and should learn already, and have exposure to real world and be connected to employers and what's happening. Because, I started a lot of jobs. I said, I'll never in the world ever be doing finances and accounting. Here I am, became a CPA. I didn't know, because it was a good way for me to get a foot in the door and get a job. But until you start trying things and you see what you're good at and actually expose yourself, you don't know as a young person. And we have an ability to do things like that. We need to structure our system that allow the students to have this project-based and work-based learning and obtaining this more real skills and looking, because in this innovative economy, we have so many different businesses now wanting to engage with the schools. So we need to force our university also to get engaged with, with high schools, even middle schools and employers a little bit more. And we can create these incentives.
Let's talk about this.
Yeah,
Please, yeah.
so I think I spent a lot of time thinking about this. You frame this in a question of high school students. What is the narrative that we're telling high school students, right? One of the facts about our system that always surprises people is 2/3 of students in this country go to college within 25 miles of where they live, right? But we put this public narrative out there that you have to apply to 10 different schools and find the one that's best, and you travel. And I think when we actually grapple with the fact that most people are geographically constrained, they're going to go to the institution that they can drive to or go to while they're working part-time and have access to. What then are the barriers we really need to be concerned with? And you had mentioned applying for federal student aid. We have made significant steps over the past 2 years to make that process a lot easier, right? So last year, at the end of the year, bolted into that Appropriations Act, we did a really good job of reducing the number of questions that are on the FAFSA and making that process be more automated. The year before that, in a future act, we synced up the Department of Ed and the IRS to import that information automatically. I'm not sure that students realize that it's a lot easier to go through that process. We still, again, every fall tell this story of how the FAFSA is this burdensome form and it's crazy. And I'm not saying that that's not true for some families, but we have taken real steps to reduce barriers like that. And then I think we need to really do a better job of getting that message out there and helping students understand that.
Fantastic. Every issue that we're discussing under this roof today has an effect on the American workforce of the future. And even as a still spreading disease has utterly redefined the workplace as we know it right now. But I want to talk a little bit more about the future, and specifically career and technical education. We often talk about these ideas of what should students be studying in the future? What kind of fields should they be entering? What should we be prioritizing, whether it's in an infrastructure package or a spending bill or whatever else, to get our students, non-traditional or traditional, ready for the future? I want to talk a little bit more about your perspectives on which fields we should be prioritizing. For example, Representative, you have a bill out there talking about accounting and making that part of the STEM field, right? Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
I think, financial skills will serve all of us very well. I'm telling you, there is no money, no margin, no mission, right? In anything, we have to have money and be able to. I actually was very surprised. I was a high school ambassador for CPA Society right around the schools in Indiana. I was very surprised how little knowledge a lot of students have. When really, we're the powerhouse of finances in the world. And if you don't understand finances, regardless, you start your own business, you go to college, you work for large corporations, small, invest, buy houses, you need to understand finances. And I think we need to do a better job. So I think that would serve well. But I think if we talk about the future, government should not be, in the business of doing strategic planning. Real bad idea. With each administration, plan is going to change. So I think it's a bad idea for us, to do strategic plan or decide. We might not even realize what job of the future is going to be. We need to deliver fundamental skills for the kids to have an ability to learn, because that is going to be, with this fast change of economy, and technology, these skills are going to be the most valuable skills. You will not be able, most of us will not be able to get a job and work there for 20, 30, 40 years as used to be. We'll have to constantly innovate, reskill ourselves, retool ourselves, and really post-secondary education also need to adjust to provide the skills. Right now, there are not very good ways for you, unless you have ability to spend a lot of money for adult to actually re-educate yourself to new skills. And I think that's something we have to have a serious conversation about, but also, are we delivering these fundamentals? And I can tell you, a lot of these fundamentals are not delivered right now. And, in our colleges, in our K-12, and it's a huge problem, because when you don't know fundamental skills and don't have that knowledge, it's very easy for you to learn and go to higher level. And I think that has to be done better.
I'd like to hear Wisconsin's perspective on this. What should we be focusing on?
areas that I think we have huge shortages of. In the medical field, there'll be a huge shortage of nurses for the rest of our lives. And somehow we've got to get more nursing professors, but there's a shortage there. One of the reasons we can't build houses, we don't have enough people who understand construction. And manufacturing, skilled people in manufacturing we have a shortage of. And I think part of the problem is the guidance counselors, the people in the high schools it doesn't occur to them to think about any one of these three things. And they ought to be forced to go through their local manufacturers, forced to talk to some people in construction, and forced to talk to some people in the medical field, and maybe take the kids through there so they know what's available and how much money can be made in those fields. That's what I think we have to do.
Closing thoughts on that front?
Yeah, I think rather than articulate a particular career field, I think there's a real opportunity here around how we organize government, particularly at the state level, which is to say that, we've already seen some states, Oregon and Missouri informally, Indiana formally, where they've actually really merged their post-secondary office and their workforce development offices and sort of are treating the talent development holistically. And rather than siloing these things off, actually thinking about how we can both invest those resources and connect with potential students and workers in a cohesive way. Because students and workers don't think of the two systems as being different. They want to get skills to get a good job. And I think the more that we see policy planning that is like looking at the two systems as one, I think it's a positive thing. And we've seen some early steps of that in the States.
In the remaining time that we have left here, I just want to hear it very bluntly from everybody here. Is the system prepared for this? Is it prepared for the future? And if it is, or if it isn't, frankly, what do you see as the federal government's role in shaping that future?
Well, I think the problem with the current system, I think it's a little bit smug. I think they always think they're doing a great job when they're not doing a great job. I think the university, as far as things like loans or Pell Grants, can kind of use it to direct people in a better direction. And insofar as they are going to put money in there, I mentioned nursing as being an example, they can maybe direct that money to areas of need rather than just putting it willy-nilly wherever the education establishment wants it.
No, the system is not. But we have a very innovative and vibrant economy. And I think innovation, entrepreneurship in our economy can bring our education to such a next level that never existed before with the technology. And I think the government just need to think about how we can have policy that incentivize more innovation and competition in the system. And that can be resolved. But if the system stays like it is right now, it does disservice to a lot of young people. And I think we have to have a serious conversation on that.
What are some options there in your view for spurring that very thing?
Well, I think, to have more flexibility, system is very bureaucratic and top-down regulated with perverse incentive, run outcomes, and it's really just constantly regulating, micromanaging the system. It needs to be more flexibility on the ground. To have more flexibility with all of it in funding. The funding requires, there are so many mandates. I couldn't believe it. Like when I was working in the State House, I couldn't believe like the books like this thick of mandates. I thought like, how in the world can I even read that thing? And everyone is just compliant, teachers compliant, schools compliant. The worst of it, no one ever looks at this report. I said, well, anyone looks at it, usually like in the business world, if I get a report, there is some action that I require to do. No, there is no action. It's just compliance for the sake of compliance and all of this. And it's just not helping these kids. A lot of money are wasted in resources and energy and compliance, not educated children, not actually creating value. And we need to think about that and how we can have more choice and discretion on the ground where that student, that parent has more choice, that school has more choice, the teacher has more choice, not standardized testing about nothing. A lot of this testing, the teaching to the task, not to teaching the skills. I think we have to rethink about it. I know that government is much easier to regulate than deregulate. Don't get me wrong. I actually work with teachers union in Indiana to try to deregulate because I felt that, these poor teachers, have to go through a lot. But we need to have this fresh look on the educational system. And until we do that, we actually stagnate and make our system not as innovative as should be, because I think the opportunities with technology are now immense. And if we do that, we'll have great outcomes for our children.
Fantastic. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon.